This video is brought to you by the City of Arches, a high fantasy city sourcebook available for your fantasy role-playing games, now on Kickstarter. Designed for D&D and 5th edition variants, but usable with any fantasy RPG, the City of Arches gives you a site of endless adventure you can drop into any campaign setting. This book has been built from the ground up on the principles of the lazy dungeon master to make it as easy as possible for you to build and experience your own adventures in this fantastic location. 2,000 years ago, the nameless king built a city to connect the worlds he had conquered. He's long dead, and now the city is a bustling metropolis. But monsters still come through the arches he built, and evil secret cults seek to return the nameless king to power, because that's what evil secret cults do. Dozens of hooks, fantastic locations, random encounters, evil cults, and scenarios like the Obsidian Skull. City of Arches is the lazy dungeon master at his best, and you can back it at the link below. A while back I was recommended this book. It's The Faithful Executioner by Joel Harrington, and it describes the life of an executioner, Franz, who lived during the 16th century in the city of Nuremberg. And Herr Schmidt took meticulous notes about the nearly 400 executions he performed. So we're going to talk about that, how to add verisimilitude to your game, today on Dungeon Craft.
Deathbringer here. Subscribe to the channel and sign up for the Deathbringer RPG newsletter at the link below.
Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor DM, and this channel is about all things tabletop role-playing games. And if you dig that, you want to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and click all to get all of our videos. And you can support the channel and get bonus content, including access to my GM's notebook, by joining Patreon at the link below. As always, thanks to all the patrons for making this content possible. So I learned a lot of things in this book that I didn't know about how executioners really operated. So let's get into it. An executioner was an appointed position that came with a great salary, a house, and a retirement pension. Executioners did not wear hoods, and they didn't use axes, and there were no chopping blocks. They actually used swords, and the prisoner sat in a chair. Executioners were respected, but social pariahs. Towns were small, everyone knew each other, and it could get awkward being friends with a guy who had chop your uncle's head off. Executioners were also healers because the authorities didn't want you dying in your cell. If you tried to hang yourself, for example, the executioner would nurse you back to health to get you ready for your big day. Executions were announced in advance, and it was a big event. The whole town showed up, so they didn't want anyone to be disappointed. In a world before newspapers, it was a way for the local lord to get the word out that no one could mess with people in his protection. Noblesse oblige, nobility obligates. He had to keep his people safe. Judges were members of the town council, and the town hall and courtroom were the same place, with the dungeon located directly below it. These were common punishments. Attempted murderers would be punished by eye gouging, castration, or getting their hands chopped off. Perjurers, prostitutes, cheating gamblers, poachers, and recidivists got their fingers chopped off. Pimps and conmen got an N for Nuremberg branded on their foreheads. Thieves had their ears clipped off. Minor theft would get a flogging. Stocks were used for minor thieves on a first offense. People might be imprisoned for an extended period in a tower if they were politically connected. Capital punishments included hanging, live burial under the gallows, burning at the stake, drowning, and common criminals who committed heinous crimes like torture, rape, and murder would get broken on the wheel. It was essentially a giant wagon wheel. You'd be strapped to the wheel on a scaffold or a public place, and the executioner would break your limbs and remove chunks of your flesh with red-hot tongs. Then you'd be left to die of exposure to the applause of cheering crowds. Beheadings were reserved for honorable men who committed capital crimes such as murder, although one offender was convicted of being a cow pervert. An honorable man could be a farmer or a miller or a merchant or artisan who'd killed someone. There was no chopping block. You'd sit in a chair. Well, so the executioner could kill you in one sword swipe. Sometimes the victim didn't die in one shot, and that was called a botch. In his entire career, Franz Schmidt only recorded 3 botches. And that's good, because if you had too many botches, you'd be replaced as executioner. That's one thing you didn't want if you were being executed, an executioner with shaky hands. After an arrest, the accused would be held in the dungeon until the town council could be convened. At the trial, the council would be presented with evidence, hear eyewitness testimony, and the accused could give their side of the story. If convicted, you'd be executed within 48 to 72 hours. You'd have a confession heard by a clergyman of your choice. The slight delay was to get the word out to the townspeople who would show up and have a picnic and bring all their kids to the execution. It was a real family event. But why a confession, and where did the last meal come from? Well, it was so you would be calm. You see, the executioner was also something of a psychologist. They wanted you in a calm state so the execution would proceed smoothly. So the executioner would say something like, "Look, you're going to die. That's a fact. I have a 100% track record here. I'll arrange for the priest to come in, he'll hear your confession. Then when you die, you get to go to heaven and see your friends. We'll even fix you whatever you want for your last meal. You could have a nice steak. Then when you get to the chair, you got to be nice and still. I'll take your head off in one clean swipe." Women were often burned at the stake, which was extremely excruciating. And if an executioner was compassionate, they might say to you, "Look, we're going to burn you at the stake. It's going to be long and agonizing. But if you chill and go along with it, once we start the fire and it's smoldering a little bit and no one can see because of the smoke, I'll put a garrote around your neck and I can strangle you in less than 30 seconds if you don't kick and scream. It'd be a lot less painful, but I need your cooperation." That in the Middle Ages and Renaissance was considered compassion. There were no prisons or parole. The idea that bad behaviors can be corrected and people can be rehabilitated, those are very modern ideas rooted in the Enlightenment, and they didn't manifest in the prison system till a couple of hundred years later. In the Dungeons & Dragons movie, Chris Pine's character gets arrested, sent to a high-security prison, and he gets a parole hearing. Like, those ideas didn't exist in the Middle Ages. I know Revel's End Prison is part of D&D lore, and it's in Icewind Dale and featured in Rime of the Frost Maiden, but that doesn't mean it makes any sense. Why would the leaders of Forgotten Realms allocate precious resources to building a supermax prison to hold the world's most dangerous criminals who, if they escaped, could overthrow them? A more sensible approach would be to make like Thulsa Doom. You want to cause trouble? Contemplate this on the Tree of Woe. Arrests and evidence were based on eyewitness accounts. In one case, a pair of thieves murder a young man that they were hanging out with at a tavern. He had some gold, and he was spending it buying drinks for them. And later on, he turned up dead in a ditch. So the authorities investigate. They know who he is. They go to his family. They say, yes, he did get some newly minted gold coins. And then the innkeeper can confirm, yes, he paid me in newly minted gold coins. And I recognize the guys he was talking about, Shank and Lefty Pete. And the authorities know that Shank and Lefty Pete are criminals. And they ride down the only road on horses, catch up with Shank and Lefty Pete, arrest them, and quickly those guys are executed. Shank is a real criminal nickname for the book, by the way. A lot of these criminals had nicknames: Shank, Brains, and Stammering Kathy. So if you want your game to be a little more realistic, the rogues should all have nicknames. So having read this book and knowing all this, how do you add verisimilitude to your D&D campaign if that's something you want? Well, first, traveling PCs would have to pay a toll upon entering any town or city. Scribes take down their names, occupations, destination, and record where they'll be staying, even if it's in an inn, because the innkeeper is now responsible for anything they do. So if a merchant's house is mysteriously robbed, the innkeeper would be on the hook for the robbery as much as the thief, which means innkeepers in this time were actually spies for the authorities. 2, using a false identity is a capital crime, punishable by execution. 3, if a merchant's house is robbed, the authorities will show up. That merchant is going to have political connections to the town council, and a complete list of the stolen items and their descriptions would be compiled. New people to the city would immediately be suspect and interviewed as to where they were when the crime was committed. If the PCs were to leave a city right after a crime, they would really be suspect, and any stolen items discovered would be evidence of their guilt. If the amount is small, let's say a few gold pieces, they would be flogged and warned not to do it again. On a second offense, the thief's face is branded with the letter of the town, or their ear gets clipped off. On a third offense, if the amount is large, they'd be executed on the wheel. An attempted murder would result in a serious flogging, eye gouging, branding, finger removal, or ear clipping. And if you injured someone with a sword, a dagger, an arrow, or a spell, that would be considered potential murder. Yeah, this is a game about wizards and elves, but if you want your world to seem real, there's got to be real-world consequences. At least that's what I think. What do you think? Share in the comments below. And if you want more tips on world building, check out these videos. I'll see you next time. May all your rolls be 20s.
Deathbringer again. I just got a job as town executioner. I'll be heading there soon. Now sign up for my Deathbringer newsletter and watch more Dungeon Craft.